All right. Well, we are joined today with Doug Scott from Dallas, Texas. Doug has a counseling practice here, and he was super kind enough to invite me down to Dallas for an afternoon, and so I'm super thankful for his kindness and generosity. Doug, thanks for meeting me today.
My pleasure.
So for maybe some of our listeners that haven't crossed paths with you and your work in the world, how do you introduce yourself when you start and kind of say, this is what I do and who I am?
Yeah, well, it certainly depends upon the audience. No doubt about that. I would say that the way I understand myself is that my vocation is to be a bridge, and it can be a bridge between the conventional world and then sort of a cosmic kind of thinking that people may not know how to navigate in, but they feel attracted towards. And so that's the liminal space that I occupy there to help them navigate that, validate, normalize their own experiences, and then go at a pace that they're comfortable with. I try not to lead anybody. And if I do, I ask them to stop me. Really, I'm trying to walk with them.
Yep.
But then even in totally the conventional understanding, let's just say regular mental health counseling or that kind of thing, then also being a bridge to help them get their own goals. So for example, in counseling, the first thing I say when I'm with a client, like if you were a client and this is the first time we're meeting, I always tell people the way I understand counseling. And I say this to everybody. I mean, this is no matter in Spanish, in English, because I lived in Latin America for a few years, so I speak Spanish. I always say to them, the way I understand counseling is that I've been a counselor for 21 years, and I see myself in it's your car, you're driving, you're in the driver's seat, you get to tell us where we're going, I'm in the passenger seat, and I'll help us navigate to get there. But I'm also, and I tell this to everybody too, I'm broken. Like I'm completely understanding that I am not seeing myself as a guru or teacher or guide. I'm a companion on the journey as a fellow human who's both broken and whole. And I say that to people, especially if they're Christian. I might even say like I'm both, identify myself with Jesus, the wounded healer archetype.
Yep.
Broken and whole. And if there's something I can offer somebody because I've gone there myself, then nothing gives me more joy.
Yeah.
The other thing too that I tell people right off the bat is, to the degree that it's appropriate, let's say, is that I also have anxiety disorder and I've had depression. I know what that feels like, and it's not an absence of the anxiety and depression that counseling helps, but really how to handle it in a life-giving way so that we have a sense of agency to deal with the anxiety and depression, and see them like I see them. My own mental issues is actually friends and teachers to help me keep grounded and balanced and empathic to people.
Yeah,
so
beautiful.
The thorn is the great blessing, as Paul would say.
Yes, indeed. The bridge metaphor that rang true for me. When in life did you come across, this is who I am, this is what I'm meant to do, this is sacred space for me? Because I think we're all in search of some type of, I'm a bridge. Like that's a massive moment to just say, this is who I am. When did that become something that
when
you
it
knew?
emerged from sort of this unconscious to subconscious to conscious? I would say that has been probably the past 7 years.
Wow. So 14 years into counseling, doing this, and
No, at that point, the 14 years into counseling, I would see, and I still do see myself this way too, but just not as defined as the bridge piece, is I see myself as it's a ministry where I am, if I'm dealing, especially if someone is Christian that I'm seeing, for example, is I tell them that my own theology, the way I understand it, is that I've only seen one person in 21 years of counseling. that person, capital P, is Christ.
Mm.
It's the broken and risen Christ that indwells in you, and it's the broken and risen Christ that dwells within me that is connecting to the Christ in you. There's only one person. There's
That's
only
right.
one exchange here. And so because people ask me, like, how do you do this every day? And don't you need a break? Because I'll see somebody else, like, do you want to take a 5-minute break before you see me? I say, no. I don't get burnt out, because for me, it's like, it's just the same Christ
Mm.
come packaged in Ashton, or, somebody else, Felipe or whatever. It's the same Christ. And to be really honest with you, I still see myself this way too, is if I had when I describe my vocation in more conventional settings, it is simply to help the person encounter, maybe for the first time, or re-engage if it's happened more than once, and perhaps learn to live from their anchored self.
Mm.
And their anchored self, the term anchored self is a play on words that I describe as the true self.
Yeah, yeah.
Vis-a-vis the floating self would be the false self.
Okay.
So I have a whole presentations I do in public or in counseling. The listeners can't, but can you put
Oh yeah,
like links
yeah. I can
and
put
stuff?
images. Yeah.
So I have two important. They're broken because I use them so much. I don't want to hang them up because my wife says it doesn't go with the color theme. So I don't. But so you can. What I've got here is I've got like 3 sort of concentric 3 circles. The bottom large one is going to be the this is God or God or the ground of being. Doesn't really matter what metaphor we're using, but and if it's an atheist and someone who doesn't believe in any transcendent reality at all, I could just talk about, let's say, the common humanity,
Mhm.
something that's bigger than us, that includes
Right.
our sort of nature,
Yeah.
Yeah. But then this would be the anchored self, which is anchored into the larger reality, and then our floating self is floating above like a balloon, just getting bashed around by the winds of emotions. Of the day. Today I'm great, tomorrow I suck, and sort of, and to look at the floating self, the false self, is not the bad self, but as a self that becomes dangerous. And you're going to hear me channeling Richard Rohr this whole time.
Bring it on.
Channeling, I'm sorry, it becomes dangerous when that is the only self we know.
Right.
And for 90% of people that walk in here, they've never known another self.
Mm-hmm.
So just the fact that we can talk about that there are 2 selves, and then help them embody their anchored self, learn the energetics, embody, like, how does it feel when I'm in the floating self versus the anchored self, and help them discern that. That's my job.
Yeah.
Because the anchored self is the Christ self.
Yes. Yeah. Let's walk with that for a bit.
Sure.
So we did a whole series. I think Parker was on it. True Self, False Self back in the spring or last year. I can't remember when it was. Mark Nepo, a handful of guys you may know.
No kidding. I've read Mark Nepo. Yeah. And of course, Parker Palmer. I told you, I've read his books. I give it away, but he is a primary teacher of mine. I'd love to meet him someday.
Yeah. Anchored and floating. So these are, I think it would help me because I love these ideas. I just need to build some formation around it. The anchored self, totally given.
Yes.
Total gift.
Total gift.
What else can you stack on top of that to kind of...
The anchored self?
Yeah, the anchored self. Or maybe with this formation, stacking something on it's not the right words to use. That's right.
First off, I I've been in dialogue with Richard Rohr. He's a friend of mine. He's my spiritual father.
Mm-hmm.
We had a very meaningful exchange a couple of weeks ago where we were able to say in person, love you, Father, love you, Son, and it was just really well meant, connected. And so he and I, years ago, I actually told him that I used his true self, false self understanding. Of course, he gets it from Thomas Merton.
Right.
But so I see myself in a lineage.
Beautiful.
And then I'm taking it and applying it in a clinical setting that works. And what's really weird is because You mentioned earlier, like musicians, like what was it?
Yeah, let the music play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way I describe myself is that I play, like counseling for me, and using a metaphor in that way,
Yeah.
four-ish,
Yeah.
would be to play jazz with relationships.
Oh.
Because one needs to know music so well in terms of a jazz context that you forget that you're playing jazz, and then you have a dialogue that it's both yet grounded in theory and is improvisational.
In flow.
Yeah. But only one can do that from an anchored self level, not a floating self. So what I said to Richard is, this is how I'm describing the anchored self, floating self with people, true self, false self rather, and I'm calling it anchored self, floating self. And then we taught together, we co-led a retreat on the Trinity back in the CAC in 2018. And I presented this formally there, and people really reacted to it because now they could see, in sort of a way that it provides some level of visualization, but also takes away the perhaps possible negative connotation of the word false. If you kind of see it as floating, then you don't have the overlay of the negativity as false, because it's not negative.
Yeah, and there's an invitation in floating to detach, which is so hard to do. Right?
Well, the way my model understands it, again, informed by Christianity and Richard and Thomas Merton, it's actually not a detaching. It is a pulling down, because this is probably overly clever and not that helpful, but when I present this, I do present that there's a string between the anchored and floating. And the string, I call it the holy tether, because I think it's tethering, but it's holy, it's sacred. And that the point of life, ultimately, is to embody the anchored self, the true self, more and more as we can, but that we use the floating self to do good in the world. So there's an agency that you're grounded, embodied in the anchored self, but then you use your gifts, your image, all that stuff to do good in the world. And so the actual movement, and I got this directly from Parker Palmer, so you can tell him this if you see him, but it's because I remember in grad school he talked about something about the real movement, quote, up. Of course, Richard Rohr then talks about falling upwards. It's up, it's actually down and in. The spiritual movement is down and in.
Right.
That's what I teach. And so that the floating self, is a movement down and in, so that as one becomes more embodied in the anchored self, the floating self is brought down from less compulsion down to a secure attachment upon the anchored self. It never goes away, because it's as holy, if you will, as the anchored self, and it becomes a part of the anchored self. And so but then I teach how the floating self falls down and is, you could say, being pulled down, comes from, as Richard Rohr describes, as the great love and great suffering.
Right.
Those two-pronged.
The two doorways.
And how do we learn our great love and our great suffering is how the floating self actually descends. Is that I mean, that's sort of how I see it. I don't know if that works for you.
No, it's beautiful. Yeah. No, I think in a way, it brings the false self a little bit closer. I think some of the language is like, keep me away from that.
Yes.
Don't let me
kill it.
Kill it. Yeah. Bad. Don't go there. Richard spent his life saying, this isn't the bad. This is not bad. I mean, he says it over and over and over.
Right. Yeah.
But I think that's helpful language. Of it being nearby and it being okay.
Right. And so when I teach the Enneagram, I'm doing that at a big Enneagram at a training at a big church here in Dallas in a couple weeks. And I always teach the Enneagram. First, I tell the people I need an hour to talk about the anchored self, floating self, and then I'll teach the Enneagram.
Wow.
Because the way I teach the Enneagram, again, based upon Richard, but then other teachers that I like, is that if you know the Enneagram, the virtue of the type would be akin to the anchored self, and that the vice or compulsion is the floating self. And both work together, but as you learn to become what I call, average to healthy spectrum, as opposed to the average to unhealthy spectrum. When we do average to healthy spectrum, then we are living more and more from our virtue type, the virtue aspect of our type, or more from the anchored self. So this is also a great way to talk about the Enneagram, and then marry those two together.
For sure. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, thank you.
In studying a lot of your work, a few of the things that I noticed were one, your humility as to what you teach with. I think some of the presentations I've seen you do, you actually begin with like, hey, I don't really know what's going on here. Yeah. Which is such a healthy place to begin with, right? Out of that certitude and really into a spirit of curiosity. Mm-hmm. One of the things I wanted to chat through, and I think that you would be helpful maybe with some of your own path and story, but also just the hundreds, if not thousands of people you've sat with over the years, is how we move, how our evolution of consciousness keeps going, how we take that next step, how oftentimes in the traditions that I've grown up in, a next step into the mystery is a bad place. Is a bit too liberal, a bit too progressive.
Or new agey,
dangerous. Stay here, stay in that lane, which is weird. That like I am actually finding the words of the narrow path. Like the narrow path is actually continuing on the path of mystery. And I think a lot of the
that's good. Repeat that again. That's really good.
Yeah, the narrow path is actually the path where we keep continuing to step into the mystery.
The mystery.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, hold my hand on coming across new ideas in the world.
Yeah.
Affirming that which is good, true, and beautiful. That's not really within your brand
of coffee. That's not affirmed by the foundation that you came from.
That's right.
But you can't stay there because something is calling you. I don't want to say better, but more expansive.
That's I over and over. So many of our listeners and friends of mine that I have, this seems to be the conversation we're having. That we know we're being invited.
Yeah.
We know we're being drawn or pulled in healthy ways into new ways of being. And yet there's a lot of folks saying, "Come back." Don't go that way.
Most people would.
Yeah.
And if you're familiar with the work of Brene Brown, which you said you were, then the way people pull you back is either overt or covert or overt illusions to shame you back into the foundational area because they're uncomfortable. And, if they're working from, say, the blue meme, the blue level from Spiral Dynamics, they're actually worried about your soul. They're worried, in the name of love, come back. I want to see you in heaven, that kind of thing.
Right.
And when I will get to this because earlier, and this is actually where I'm at in my life right now, is a companion to be a bridge. We talked about being a bridge. It is a total surprise to me in some sense where I'm at in my life right now, but on other senses I've always been this way, is being a bridge where I myself, and this is the part that I hate because it's so, I'm going to say painful. It's dark night, depression, painful. And that I only I only walk with people with some level of maybe more assurance than they are, because I go through it first where, yes, I have mentors that help me, but I also leave the path of the mentor, not higher, but different, in territory that I myself am walking around and experiencing pain. And I don't have somebody, let's say, walking with me insofar as telling me the next steps in my journey, but it's been people who have affirmed me. It's like, I love you anyways. And so my job, in a sense, is to be somebody that I wish I would have had or could have had to help me
Right.
But I never would be able to do what I do if I had somebody like that, in a sense, because it's been my journey to feel the pain. And that's why when I talk to a lot of people, when they're feeling a certain level of anxiety or sadness or whatever, or fear or whatever, I know to the nuance, I know exactly what they're feeling, because I felt that, maybe even just recently.
Your own hero's journey.
In a sense, yeah. So this is another, before I get to that stuff there, this is actually the second big thing that I use.
Wow.
What we're looking at is kind of a horizontal hourglass.
Yeah.
Again, you can probably see that and already see the teachers that I'm reading.
Yep.
But I'm a visual person and I'm a pedagogue, so I always like to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we have here is that on one side, I guess the left side if you're looking at you, is the old room. And it's nice and beautiful. And I actually have it colored gold because it's always so good looking in the old room, Familiar.
Yeah.
And then you get thrust into the liminal space, which is sort of the space in between the
disorder.
It's the disorder. Good. We have order, disorder, and then reorder. The new room is the other side. And oftentimes I teach people just this motto, and we'll spend several sessions just on locating them in the liminal space, locating their journey as you leave the old room. Liminal space is too painful. There's no mentors to affirm you there. So we go back to the old room.
Yes.
We redecorate it, but it never is satisfying, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not.
That no mentor thing rang true.
Yeah.
That you just said.
You just don't have any mentors because there's not a lot of people who can in our society who can weather liminal space, except for people like Parker Palmer, Richard Rohr, these kinds of teachers that make it known at a popular level.
Yeah.
Otherwise, man, how do you know how to weather that? Now, what some people who are a little bit more advanced in their journey, what I tell them is, when you get to the new room, that's great, but the new room becomes...
It's going to turn gold soon.
It becomes the old room. You're already seeing where this goes.
Yeah.
And then you have to do the journey again.
Yeah. It's the pattern of everything.
So eventually, what we see in mature spiritual people on any path, psychologically and spiritually mature, are people who actually make their home in liminal space. Like that, they're Moses in the desert saying, I'm never going to get there. And that's actually okay. Or to pull on from Jesus's archetype. I
don't have anywhere to lay my head.
The Son of Man has no place to lay my head. And that's actually the journey.
Yeah.
So to learn to build your mansion upon the constant shifting sands of liminal space is actually the sign of maturity.
Wow. And
that's where somebody who's in that liminal space can handle both sadness and joy together, or both. I don't know where I'm going, but I know how I'm going to get there.
A comfort with paradox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holding those two together, because in liminal space we have the complexity. You learn to hold complexity, but it's so uncomfortable. So that's why people want to get out of there as soon as you can. But then when you've done it so many times, you learn to actually make the uncomfortable comfortable. Yeah. So going back to the belief systems.
Yeah.
In my own life, I have always been attracted to mystical levels of Christianity. I remember early on in kindergarten, first grade, of having a sensibility of feeling intuitively the presence of Jesus, and then having not visions insofar as seeing Jesus, with my naked eye there, but having an absolute knowing that takes a place in the inner eye, let's say, of a vision of Jesus that is nonetheless true. It's seeing with the inner eye, the heart eyes, if you will. Jesus, Mary, my guardian angels, just always having a sense of the presence of these beings that I'm learning about, through my religion of origin, which was Catholicism. And then always being attracted to reading Lives of the Saints. I mean, where a lot of kids maybe wanted to read books about, I don't know, comic books or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I was always attracted to the Lives of the Saints and the mystical ones, you know?
Yeah.
Or I would be reading books on the paranormal, and I didn't know why I would be dabbling in these things. Nobody in my family, I mean, I'm still considered the weirdest person anybody in my family's ever met. And we make a joke of it now. But, and so I was thinking about becoming a priest. Do you want me to go in this direction?
Let's do it.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
I was thinking about becoming a priest for a long time, a Capuchin priest. I was very attracted to Franciscanism. And Franciscanism, in fact, has been with me since I was about second or third grade. Never knew a Franciscan, was attracted to the story of Francis, again, having that sensibility of presences. I mean, I totally know what the person of Francis feels like in terms of my relating. There's an absolute relationship I have with Francis that is as real as anybody I know in the flesh here.
Wow.
And there's an energetic signature. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, then after college, I went to University of North Texas here in Denton and studied psychology and Spanish. Then I went to Nicaragua for 2 years with the Capuchins in a lay missionary program. And all the while, I'm learning to marry my love of service with discernment of priesthood, religious life, bringing tapes of Richard Rohr and listening to them in the jungles. I mean, that's a weird juxtaposition there. And then I get out, come back to the States, and what is true when you do a ministry like that is you're told you actually don't become a minister, or you really don't begin your ministry until you come back. Because I was completely converted, if you will, in Nicaragua. I left Texas as not knowing the world at all, but would see myself as Catholic apologetics, teaching Catholic apologetics. Very conservative. Politically, my dad listened to Rush Limbaugh, so that's what I grew up with. Didn't know any other way to think. And then in Nicaragua, saw so much that opened my eyes. Boy, was that painful. And then coming back to the same people that actually had never gone through any of that kind of liminal space movements in their life. So they're still hanging out at the same, bandwidth of consciousness. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's not where I was at. How do you become a compassionate witness to whatever truths you learned in a way that is not feeding into any of the negativity or shadow that you see? That's the real nuance.
Cultivating compassion. Not inflating your own ego. Thinking I've seen something you haven't seen.
Yes.
That's a very interesting place.
But at the same time, saying that I do see in some ways things you don't see, because that's also true. Experientially. Now I can say that it's mine. When I came back to the States, then I went to Boston College and got 2 master's degrees, one in clinical social work and one in pastoral ministry. And then met my wife, actually, in CatholicSingles.com, and she had done 4 years of work with the Franciscans in Philadelphia. She went to Princeton and did every year. She would go every week. She was going to the soup kitchen in Philadelphia for 4 years. And then she was there for a full year as a Franciscan lay missionary volunteer, like I was in Nicaragua. So we Franciscanism is very close to our heart. I share all that because back in 2013, it was April of 2013, I was bumping up against the ceiling of, and I wouldn't be able to define it this way then. This is only now I can say this, but bumping up against the ceiling of the religious background that includes Richard Rohr's teaching and all of these other teachings that I have. So you could call it, more mystical and progressive, but bumping up to the ceiling of that and wondering what else is there. And I think of the word heard/felt. I don't know how to describe that, but a nudge voice that said, listen to a chant. And this was after 10 hours of seeing clients. I was finishing paperwork and I'm right in front of a computer. And so maybe I was just brain dead. Maybe that was it. But I said, put on a chant. Because just prior to that, I was praying. I was like, okay, so what's next? I'm sort of feeling a desire, but I have no idea what this means. Only that I said something towards a cosmic help me, which I think was interpreted as there's a readiness. So the chant, what was also weird about this invitation was it wasn't about a Gregorian chant. I love Gregorian chant, and I listened to it a lot. And had at that point, but that was not the chant that I was being called to. It was a Buddhist chant, which I had no idea about Buddhism, other than it was respected by people like Thomas Merton.
Right.
So I typed in Buddhist chant on YouTube, pressed return, and what came up was the first thing that came up. I clicked on it, and it was Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum was this chant. And what I learned later on, what Om Mani Padme Hum roughly means is something similar, probably doing it wrong here, but something similar to how the one and the many are one. And really it's the law of one.
Right.
And what happened, again, when I turned on that music and the music started to come and the chanting started to come, I saw, not with these eyes, but with my heart eyes, you can call it
third eye,
an overlay of the world around me was a golden dew, sort of energetically falling around me and encircling me. And there was a freshness, a levity about it, an inclusiveness. It was intimately familiar, yet there was, and with a transcendent quality, but yet it was also new. It was a freshness, new, familiar, all those weird things at the same time. And that launched me into, I guess, that's the next book in my life.
Interesting.
One book was not closed, but maybe this is volume 2 of the same story. And what I became insatiable in terms of my thirst was the metaphysics behind Hinduism, especially like non-dual stuff, Buddhism, Sufi, more Christian, but never mind apologetics. I want to know like I want to know the experiences of the John of the Cross. And so these kinds of things I started, and New Age stuff. That's the other thing too I wanted to mention is that I was always steering clear of the New Age because of the fear of dabbling into, the devil and all that stuff. But all of a sudden, what was New Age, what I was reading there, and then when I was reading in Hinduism, was starting to, in my mind, there were some parallels that I didn't see in Christianity. So that made me really interested. But I had no idea what I was looking at. So I was launching into a place that was at once exciting, but also anxiety provoking, because I knew that I was leaving my wife behind in a sense. Not that we talk about spirituality a lot or anything, but she has no interest in this kind of thing. So I knew that there was a way in which I needed to learn how to integrate that.
Yeah. And so being in that liminal space, even with someone that close to you, right, I guess has been, what have you learned of let me ask it differently. What could you invite someone, whether it's ritual, practice? I don't even want to give you ideas of when you are in a new way of seeing. it's a hard place to be
There were
in.
a couple of things that I did do concrete that really helped.
Yeah.
One was I serendipitously was introduced to a Christian spiritual director.
Okay.
A friend of mine, PhD psychologist, had this guy, and he kept raving about how deep this, at that point, psychiatrist was. He was also a spiritual director, Christian, trained by the Anglicans, himself a Presbyterian, was writing a book on Jungian psychology. Just super deep guy.
Yeah.
And this is going to be an arrogance. What I'm about to say is arrogant, but anytime I've ever tried a spiritual director in the past, within the first 10 minutes of my connecting with that spiritual director, it was already clear to me that I was either speaking already their language. I could sense that there wasn't anything I could be offered and they could sense that too, subconsciously. And we began to talk as peers, where they were disclosing stuff to me as if I was their spiritual director. So I didn't want that anymore, and that's why I didn't have one for a long time. But this guy, his name is Dr. Troy Caldwell, and if anybody's actually looking for a Christian spiritual director, I recommend him. But he provided for me, when I met with him, he was so patient. The first session was probably 2.5 hours where he got 3 words in, but I just needed someone to hold a space so that I could just throw, if you've got 20 different screens on your computer, I need someone to be able to hold all the tabs open.
That's right. Your questions, the angst, the wonder,
and all the things that are exciting me. Without saying, this is dangerous, and he did exactly that. Not only did he do that, but he also met me where I was at and then helped me to, he wouldn't say like, I totally understand what you're saying. And he would never say, I disagree with what you're saying. But he would say, let's walk together in that. So we might open up a portal together, a door into something, and then have a dialogue based upon what my response would be to that. So at once pastoral, but amicable at the same time. That was one thing I did. The second thing I did was I started to do centering prayer. Vis-a-vis Cynthia Bourgeau's work. And that gave me a practice that was stable and grounding, and the notion behind centering prayer is actually to learn how to live in liminal space. Because to live in liminal space requires one to let go whenever it enters into your consciousness that there's an attachment here, whether that attachment is, if you're doing centering prayer, whether it's an image or an idea, but if in life, if it is an anxiety or a certain kind of angst, if you will, to also let that go. And then come back to a place of, it is darkness, it is a dark night, but the dark night is not because it's an absence of something, it's because there's such a plenum, such a fullness that it actually short circuits the mechanisms to see anything. So that's why it's dark. But so centering prayer was an embodied practice that I could do every morning for 20 minutes. And then together, and then I would explore, and so then I would talk to Dr. Caldwell, and then do centering prayer, and then keep reading, and those things help me.
And so, are you at a place where you've found a contentment, a peace on your own journey, and not really? Is it the ego that needs everyone else to come along? Because I think there's a lot of us that have that conversation of why have others not seen what I've seen, or why aren't they where I'm at? And it sounds like you found a peace in some new worlds that have excited you, and it's really not, is everyone else going to come along,
But that wisdom, what you just said, was long in coming for me. I may have been able to cognitively say that, but as a lived gnosis, a gnosis, which is a lived experiential knowledge, that took lots of years and a crap load of pain. And that is precisely why I see myself as a bridge. So people's pain doesn't have to be as intense, because there was needless pain in some ways, looking back. Based upon my own, I would argue, mental illnesses or mental health problems, why it was so painful, which doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Yeah. The levels where I was moving into that was exciting me would be concepts that I felt were in opposition to conventional Christianity as I understood it. Now I see a synthesis, but only it's because I've done the work in my blog, which is sort of narcissistic because it's
The Cosmic Christ.
The CosmicChrist.net, and that's been my it's been a letter to me. It's 250 letters to myself to help me synthesize these things.
Well, the podcast has been my own counseling session.
You understand.
Yeah.
And if other people are, it's helpful for them, then that's the point.
Yeah.
What I have found is that things I were interested in would be things like, is reincarnation real? And how can one understand that? Is there something to be said about subtle bodies? What exactly is the salvific work of, let's say, Jesus? If atonement theory, because I had rejected atonement theory, but that was a long process too. I mean, I probably don't have to tell you about that. Because 95% of Christians, especially in our state, Texas, will understand
Penal
Jesus saves in only one way. So, but once you move through atonement theory to at-one-ment, but then see it in sort of the universal Christ aspect that's clearly there in scripture and in tradition, but Richard Rohr does make very popular. See, he's a bridge. I'm only walking on behind him in a sense. Once you've done that, then that opens you up to look at Jesus, to look at Christianity, look at all of this. It opens you up to not throw away all of these other things that other traditions are saying, and experiences you may have. It opens you up to not see them in opposition to our own reality bubble or belief system, but actually can be incorporated and fleshing out what is already there.
Makes room.
It makes
increases your capacity.
And that's why, people now talking about include and transcend.
Right. Instead of transcend and include.
It's include, and the actual work of including it in life-giving ways through discernment, companionship, include, and then that inclusion, the process of inclusion and separating chaff from wheat, wheat from chaff, is itself it leads to transcendence. Now, in my own life, I was so intensely lonely in my private life because I could talk to nobody. And my wife still, it's like, Doug, I love you. I do believe you're delusional. I think a lot of the things that you say are actually, delusional. It's okay. A lot of people have this delusion, but I love you anyways. But that was the peace that I have with that now was not what I experienced then. And a lot of that is because I was introjecting or the countertransference I was feeling towards my wife when she was oppositional, and some of the things that I was wanting to explore was really my mom's voice in my head.
Interesting.
Using shame tactics to kind of keep me in to a certain paradigm, religiosity. It wasn't my wife's fault. It was my own inner work that had to be done through many years, you see. And then the other thing, too, is there is an absolute necessity, I think, if you're going to do the spiritual work well, is to realize that we need companions. But there don't have to be many of them, A, doesn't have to be, and B, that there's a way in which you also are going to be alone too. So you can have companions, and you're going to be doing a lot of work alone. And to people outside that were in say normal daily life, or former companions or something like that, they might look at you as, yeah, there's something going on with him.
Not the same Doug. Yeah.
It's not the same Doug, and we're a little bit worried, and that kind of thing. They're going to be projecting something on top of you.
Mm-hmm.
But what's going on inside you, sort of in a hermit kind of way, this need to go off from the crowd and pray.
Yeah.
That archetypal movement.
Yeah.
That has to be honored when you move into these levels of spirituality.
Yeah.
So it's both companionship and spirituality. But the issue is how do you have the companionship when you're moving into these worlds, and how do you trust whatever you're doing? And so what has happened in my life is that I spent lots of years kind of knocking on doors on the internet, knocking on doors and kind of seeing what's there. Nothing ever really. There were things I liked. I was very hungry, very lonely, very hungry for this stuff. But what I decided to do eventually is form my own community. So you mentioned you have a community now.
Yeah.
And I do too. And so 2 years ago, me and 3 other people formed a community that has organically kind of grown, but it's still very small, and we're going to keep it small. It's an online community, but we have like a Slack presence, that kind of thing. But also we meet on Tuesday nights and we talk about these things, the cosmic things.
Yeah.
And we call ourselves Building Forth. There's that was a name that came to me, and then I voiced it out, and everybody liked it. But that has now given me a place where I can finally say, so 2013 to 2021, is that I feel stable spiritually, in the sense that not that I'm in the new room, I'm still in liminal space, but I feel that there's a companionship of like-minded spiritual people. There is the people in my life that I had before any kind of awakening, that I love and interact with, but don't need to share any of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not wrong. It doesn't mean I love them any less. It just means that, and I can enjoy talking about baseball and stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not even superficial. I love those relationships and would die for them. But it doesn't negate the fact that I still need an area to explore these things. And then most importantly to me, to my heart, is that my own love for and relationship with my wife has only deepened. Even as our mutual participation in a shared spirituality is, from her perspective, Doug's kind of crazy, but love him anyways, and we go to church together, because I still don't throw any of the Christianity away.
Yeah. Yeah.
But from my perspective, I do not need her in any way. In fact, I argue it's best if she doesn't understand me. I don't need her to understand me. I don't need her to be on this journey with me for us to be absolute soulmates and closer than ever. Because what actually happens is philios, if you will, the friendship love, the friendship level, it does morph into an agapic level where it's unconditional love. That's not, there's no mandate that we have this uniform belief system.
Unwritten rules. Yeah.
So with that said,
I need you to be this for me, and I'll be that for you.
And with that said, that has been my own journey too, because when I've looked out into, let's say, the internet world or other people that I've talked to, that one person, quote, awakens, and the other partner is not. It's been my experience. This doesn't mean it's true. But my experience is that statistically it's going to be 80 to 90% where one person feels like they have to leave.
Yeah.
And then of course that can be devastating to a marriage, bewildering to the partner that is the unawakened one.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And again, I'm trying to provide through my own lived experience of being a bridge that that does not have to be the case. You can actually go the opposite way and love them even more. The bonds can be more strengthened vis-a-vis diversity.
Right. Yes.
Couched in unity.
Right.
Versus uniformity.
Yep.
And that becomes a lived reality.
Yep.
But it takes a spiritual maturity for the quote awakened one to realize that in the name of awakening, you better not, maybe you got to go through this, I don't know, but awakening feels like you're moving higher than, and therefore that leads you to search out people quote in your frequency level, and you're only going to be happy with a partner that is now your soul twin and your frequent, you know what I mean? You've heard that, maybe you've seen this. Instead, it's going to be go deeper with the intimate partner that you have to find whatever you feel you're awakening in as an awakening person is actually found in the relationship and in the depth of that person anyways.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, that's a beautiful insight. And I think you're right. So often you do hear someone got woke, quote unquote, and next thing you know, you've got issues on your hands.
Affairs.
But there's actually, is this a way to say it? Please correct me if I'm not saying this right. True awakening actually leads to a new, fresh love, more peace, more patience, more kindness, more goodness. I don't know. I mean, I'm piecing that together.
That might be the case for people, and it wasn't the case for me so much. I wish it were, and so that's why I'm trying to help people. But for me, it was a combination, and maybe this is actually what it needs to be for people. I don't know. But for me, the awakening process is going to always be a mixture of both the ecstasy of awakening and anxiety. Like it's both. It's there's an ecstasy and an anxiety, and the anxiety is there's many reasons why that, but one of them is, well, now how do I understand my relationship with my partner? That could be one anxiety that needs to be dealt with. Even because there's the belief, and it's not mentored otherwise in these circles, these awakening circles, is that if you are leaving the partner behind, then you owe it to yourself, your truth, to find somebody who is resonating with you. And that's normalized in these awakening circles. And
it is. From
my perspective, because I was so grounded in good Christian theology, psychology, I could see the spiritual bypassing that is, and the narcissism that is often the case. I'm not saying always, but often the case.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, you unpackaged that in a beautiful way that I haven't heard someone do before, and I think that's super necessary to hear. That on all of our narrow paths, really how to walk it with another, especially the one that you've been entrusted to.
Even if they don't right now believe or accept where you're at, or never will.
And that's okay.
In fact, my wife says, like, my version of heaven, this is our joke between us, the two of us, my wife and I, my version of heaven is, where I get to sit in heaven and read psychology and spiritual books forever. And she goes on record by saying my version of hell is where I have to read psychology and spiritual books forever. So you can't be any more opposite.
Yeah.
Yet, and I'll say this too, but my wife's spirituality is it is deeper and more authentic than I think mine is in many ways. And she is my teacher. Because she literally goes the grind every day and encounters Christ and her patients every single day. And she's a leader in the medical world, but she does it with such humility and Christian authentic Christian service that I literally hold her, and I will to the day I die, as my primary teacher in my life.
Wow.
of simplicity.
Yeah.
So she's way more Franciscan than I am.
Yeah. So in your efforts to maybe swim in the complicated world, she brings it back to that which is
now
simple.
I could argue, of course, we made this soul contract prior to incarnating here that yes, I would awaken, and no, you wouldn't, even though, because, Kelly, our bond is actually going to help me do my work, which you'll never understand when we're on the other side of the veil. So yes, Kelly, we have done this many times before.
Yeah.
To which she says, "You are so delusional." And it doesn't. Maybe I am, and maybe on one hand, and maybe there is this cosmic reality that she's doesn't have to be aware of.
Yeah. Love it. I love it. I always ask people I interview, what advice would you give to your younger self? And that could be a year ago, and that could be 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
What advice I'd give to my younger self? What I would say is, to my younger self, I would say, well, it's weird because there's a part of me that wouldn't give any advice at all.
Yep.
I would just kind of stand back with a smirk and
keep going.
Yeah, only because I trust the process now in hindsight. But what I think would have been really helpful. Let me put it to you that way. Not that I would do this.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, if I had the opportunity to go back in time and do this, I wouldn't. Because I think all the pain that I've gone through has been precisely what has led me to be who I am, even though I'm a wounded healer.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe especially because I'm a wounded healer, So whatever gifts I have, it's because I've got this pain. But what I would say is it would have been nice to have somebody come in and take me by, grab me by the shoulders, gently, look me in the eye and say, I get you. And it's okay. And the loneliness that you're feeling, the alienation you're feeling, the way you don't understand certain, how you feel like you're an outsider in a group, even though there's nothing on paper that would suggest that you are, and how you are interested in things that nobody else is, and how you feel alone, and all of that. There's a reason for it, Doug. So just trust that there is, and it's okay. And I would simply say, I see you, I accept you, and I would walk away.
Yeah. Well said. Beautiful. I feel like I could do this all day, and I probably have so many more questions that would take us down about
We haven't even touched the cosmic stuff.
4-hour path. But can we do another episode one day?
Of course.
That'd be great.
Would love
That'd
to.
be great.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, I'm super grateful just for getting time with you and for you, sharing and your generosity. If our listeners want to follow you and your work, whether it's online or even the practice you have here, how would you invite them to do that?
Two things. If they're in Texas, then my license is good for any in the state of Texas.
Gotcha.
And so if they're in the Dallas area, we can actually do it in person. If they're anywhere else, video. I have found video now for a year and a half to be as effective, really. And some of this energy work that we've just talked about is because it's can still be effective.
Yeah.
So I'd be happy to walk with people in that way as a counseling, spiritual kind of thing. But also, if people are outside of the state and want to connect with me, I do spiritual coaching. So that could be a service, and that again it would be via video, but that would be fine. I would love doing that kind of stuff. I do that as well. Now you can go to my website. I have two websites: the conventional and the cosmic. The conventional website is DougScottCounseling.com, and so that you can get a sense of what I offer counseling wise. Enneagram. A lot of people find me via Enneagram circles.
Gotcha.
Spiral dynamics. We work on that too. Do a lot of training in the area or elsewhere around these areas. But if they're interested, now if you drink, and I don't drink anymore, but if you do drink, make sure you have 2 or 3 glasses of wine
Before you go to
Cosmic Christ. And then, yeah, I don't know what else to say, but if you feel called to explore some wider metaphysics,
Yep.
CosmicChrist.net, as long as one understands that whatever is seen there can be held with a looseness, and anybody is free to reject it or hold it, put it on a shelf, bring it down later on if something makes sense.
Something rings true, beautiful. If it doesn't, it's okay too.
Perfectly said. Yeah. And so if you feel you're right at an edge where you don't know what the next thing looks like, but you're interested, curious, even excited about exploring even a lot of paranormal reality, and you want to see how that somehow synthesizes with one's own, say, Christian background, then go on there and see, and I can help you discern.
Right on, right on. Well, thank you again for your generosity. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Yep.
Appreciate it.